She gave her only jacket to a crying girl in the snow, having no idea she was the sister of the city's deadliest predator. When the Vampire King walked into her diner the next night, the whole room stopped breathing. He walked straight up to her, slammed the cheap denim coat on the counter, and stared into her terrified eyes. Everyone thought she was dead. But then he said the words that changed the fate of the entire city. "You kept her warm. Now I keep you." The winter in the city of Ethelgard was not merely weather, it was a weapon. The wind did not blow, it sliced. It carved through the alleyways of the lower district, hunting for gaps in window frames and holes in coats, seeking the warmth of the living to snuff it out. Elena knew this cold intimately. It was the constant companion of her shifts at the Rusty Spoon, a diner that sat on the edge of the territory where the humans lived and the Nightborn hunted. It was 3 in the morning, the hour of the wolf, or perhaps the hour of the ghost. The diner was empty save for Old Man Miller nursing a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and the buzzing of a neon sign that flickered with a dying headache of a sound. Elena wiped down the Formica counter, her hands red and chapped. The rag was gray, the water in the bucket was gray, and she felt, deep in her marrow, that her life was slowly turning the same color. She was 24, but her eyes held the weary vigilance of someone twice that age. She had learned early that to be noticed was to be in danger. In a city ruled by vampires, immortal, beautiful, and lethally indifferent, invisibility was the only true shield a human had. Keep your head down. Do your work. Don't bleed. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful sound that felt obscenely out of place. A gust of wind slammed into the room, carrying a slurry of ice and street grit. Elena looked up, expecting a drunk stumbling in from the bars or perhaps a Nightborn enforcer looking for a tribute of blood or fear. But the doorway was empty. Frowning, she moved around the counter, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. "Hello," she called out, her voice raspy from disuse. Nothing but the swirling snow outside, illuminated by the street lamp's sickly yellow sodium glare. She walked to the glass door and pushed it open, intending to secure the latch that always stuck in the frost. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. That was when she saw her. Standing just beyond the pool of light, near the overflowing dumpster in the alley, was a figure. A girl, perhaps 16 or 17, though it was hard to tell with her posture hunched so severely. She was wearing a dress of pale, shimmering silk, a garment that cost more than Elena would earn in 10 lifetimes, but utterly useless against a blizzard. Her arms were wrapped around herself, her skin the color of skimmed milk, turning a dangerous shade of blue at the lips. Elena froze. The instinct, the survival instinct that had kept her alive in the foster homes and the streets, screamed at her to go back inside. The girl's dress marked her as high district. Maybe a pet of a vampire, maybe bait. Nothing good came from mixing with the aristocracy of the night. But then the girl made a sound. A small, broken whimper, like a kitten abandoned in a gutter. She looked up, and her eyes were wide, terrified, and filled with tears that froze on her cheeks. Elena cursed softly, a foul word that vanished into the wind. She didn't think, she moved. Stepping out into the biting gale, Elena shrugged off her denim jacket. The cold immediately seized her, her thin uniform shirt offering no protection, her skin prickling into gooseflesh instantly. She gritted her teeth against the shock of it and marched toward the alley. The girl flinched as Elena approached, stumbling back against the brick wall. She looked at Elena not with hope, but with the terror of a hunted animal expecting the final blow. "Hey, easy," Elena said, her voice trembling from the temperature. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl stared at her, uncomprehending. She was shaking so hard her silk dress rustled like dry leaves. "Here," Elena said. She held out the jacket. "Put this on. You're turning blue." The girl looked at the jacket, then at Elena's face, then back at the jacket. She seemed not to understand what was happening. It was as if Elena was offering her a live grenade. "Take it." Elena insisted, her own teeth beginning to chatter. She stepped closer and, defying all laws of self-preservation, draped the jacket over the girl's shoulders. The girl went rigid. For a second, Elena thought she had made a fatal mistake. The air around them seemed to thicken, a static charge raising the hair on Elena's arms that had nothing to do with the cold. But then, the girl grabbed the lapels of the cheap denim. She pulled it tight around herself, burying her face in the faux wool collar. "Go inside," Elena instructed, pointing toward the diner. "Wait by the radiator. I'll get you tea." The girl looked up. Her eyes were an unsettling shade of violet, a color that didn't occur in nature. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice was melodic, like wind chimes, but laced with confusion. "Because it's freezing," Elena said, rubbing her bare arms. "And I don't want to watch you turn into an ice sculpture. Go." The girl hesitated, then turned and fled, not into the diner, but into the deeper shadows of the alley. She moved with a speed that was blurringly unnatural, disappearing into the dark before Elena could blink. "Wait." Elena called out, but the alley was empty. She stood there for a moment, the snow piling on her hair, the cold sinking into her bones. She was shivering violently now, her only coat gone, vanished into the night with a stranger who moved too fast. "Stupid," she muttered to herself, wrapping her arms around her chest. "Stupid, stupid, stupid." She ran back inside the diner, the warmth of the heater feeling like burning needles on her frozen skin. "Where's your uniform jacket, Elena?" The voice was like a cheese grater, abrasive and irritating. Mr. Gantry, the owner, stood by the kitchen pass, his arms crossed over his stained apron. I lost it," Elena lied, her teeth still chattering. "Lost it," Gantry repeated flatly. "That's $40 out of your pay. And you're walking home tonight. I'm not driving you if you're going to be careless." Elena nodded, staring at the floor. $40 was 3 days of food. Walking home meant traversing 10 blocks of night-born territory without protection. "Yes, Mr. Gantry," she whispered. She finished her shift in a daze, the cold never quite leaving her bones. When she finally clocked out at 5 a.m., the city was a monochrome nightmare of gray slush and black shadows. She walked fast, head down, praying to a god she wasn't sure was listening. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward her. Every rustle of the wind sounded like footsteps. She made it to her efficiency apartment, a single room with a leaking sink and a lock that barely worked, and collapsed onto the mattress without taking off her shoes. She pulled her thin duvet over her head, shivering, trying to generate warmth. She didn't know that 3 miles away, in the obsidian tower that overlooked the city like a black dagger piercing the moon, a king was holding a cheap denim jacket in hands that could crush steel, staring at it as if it were the answer to a riddle that had plagued him for centuries. 2 days later, the sky was a bruised purple as the sun began to set. Elena was restocking the napkin dispensers, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger in her stomach. The docked pay meant she had skipped lunch and dinner. The atmosphere in the diner changed instantly. It wasn't a sound, it was a pressure change. The air grew heavy, the taste of ozone and iron filling the room. The few patrons fell silent. Even the buzzing neon signs seemed to dim. The door didn't open with a chime this time. It was held open by a man who looked like he was carved from granite. He wore a suit that cost more than the building, and his eyes were hidden behind dark glasses, though the sun had already dipped below the horizon. He stepped aside. Another man entered. And then the silence in the room became absolute. It was him. Everyone in the city knew the face, though few had seen it in person and lived to speak of it without stuttering. Valerius, Lord of the Onyx Court, King of the Nightborn, ruler of Ethelgard. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, falling loosely over a forehead that was pale as marble. His face was a landscape of sharp angles and devastating beauty, but it was his eyes that froze the blood in Elena's veins. They were crimson, burning with an inner light, ancient and terrifyingly intelligent. He scanned the room. His gaze swept over Old Man Miller, over a trembling couple in the booth, over a sweating Mr. Gantry. Then his eyes locked on Elena. It felt like a physical touch. Elena dropped the napkin dispenser. It clattered loudly on the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. The king moved. He didn't walk, he flowed, closing the distance between the door and the counter in a heartbeat. He stopped directly in front of her. Up close, the power radiating off him was suffocating. He smelled of rain, cedar, and old blood. Mr. Gantry was shaking so hard the change in his pocket jingled. "My lord," he squeaked. "Whatever she did, Silence," the king said. He didn't raise his voice, but the word hit the room with the force of a hammer. Gantry's mouth snapped shut. Valerius looked at Elena. He placed something on the counter between them. It was her jacket. It had been cleaned. The denim was pressed, the faux wool fluffed and white again. The missing button on the cuff had been replaced with a silver one, engraved with a crest she didn't recognize. Elena stared at it, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked up at him, unable to speak. "This is yours," Valerius said. His voice was deep, a baritone that vibrated in her chest. Elena swallowed, her throat dry as sand. "I gave it away." "To whom?" "I don't know her name," Elena whispered. She was cold. Valerius stared at her. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. But in the depths of those crimson eyes, something swirled, confusion, curiosity, and a strange, terrifying intensity. "You're human," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes. You have no wealth. No status. No protection." He leaned forward slightly, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. The formica cracked under his fingers. "Why would you give your only protection against the winter to a stranger?" Elena felt the weight of the room watching her. She felt the danger radiating from him. One wrong word and she was dead. But Elena, for all her fear, had never been good at lying. "Because she was crying," Elena said, her voice small but steady. "And nobody should freeze alone." The king flinched. It was microscopic, a mere tightening of the jaw, but to Elena, it was momentous. He looked down at the jacket, then back at her. The crimson in his eyes seemed to dim, replaced by something profound and unsettling. "That stranger," Valerius said softly, "was my sister. Serafina." The air left the room. Mr. Gantry gasped. "She has a condition," Valerius continued, his voice tight. "Her mind is fragile. She wandered from the estate. My guards searched for hours. When we found her..." He paused, his gaze dropping to the jacket again. "She was wearing this. She told me the girl with the sad eyes gave it to her." Elena gripped the edge of the counter to keep her knees from buckling. The sister of the vampire king. She had treated the sister of the most powerful predator in the city like a runaway teenager. "I didn't know," Elena stammered. "I'm sorry, I didn't." "Do not apologize," Valerius commanded. He reached out. For a terrifying second, Elena thought he was going to grab her throat. Instead, his hand hovered over hers, not quite touching, but close enough that she felt the impossible cold radiating from his skin. "Do you know what usually happens to my kind when they are found vulnerable by yours?" he asked. His voice was low, intimate, shutting out the rest of the room. "They're staked, burned, or sold." Elena said nothing. She knew the stories. "You," he said, gave her warmth. He straightened up, the mask of the king sliding back into place. He turned to his enforcer by the door. "Marcus." The man in the sunglasses stepped forward. "My lord." "Escort Miss." He looked back at her. "What is your name?" "Elena," she whispered. "Elena Vance." "Escort Miss Vance to the car," Valerius ordered. Elena's blood ran cold. "Wait. No. Please. I have to finish my shift." "I can't." Valerius looked at Mr. Gantry. "This establishment is now under the protection of the Onyx Court. However, Miss Vance no longer works here." He turned his gaze back to Elena. "You will not work here again. You will not freeze again." "Where are you taking me?" Elena asked, panic rising in her throat. She backed away until her back hit the soda machine. Valerius looked at her, and for the first time, the harsh lines of his face softened. It wasn't a smile, that would be too human, but the tension in his shoulders eased. "Home," he said. "You protected my blood, Elena Vance. Now I will protect you." The ride to the obsidian spire was silent. The interior of the limousine was leather and velvet, smelling of expensive whiskey and that same rain and cedar scent that clung to the king. Elena sat on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Valerius sat opposite her, reading a tablet, seemingly ignoring her, though she could feel his awareness like a spotlight. She watched the city blur past the tinted windows. They climbed the winding roads to the high district, leaving the slush and gray grime behind for pristine avenues lined with ancient statues and wrought iron gates. "You are terrified," Valerius said without looking up from his screen. "Yes," Elena admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you alive." He set the tablet down and looked at her. "But you do not need to fear me." "You're a vampire," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "You eat people." "I drink blood," he corrected calmly. "There is a distinction. And I do not feed on guests." "Am I a guest?" Elena asked. "Or a prisoner?" Valerius tilted his head. "That remains to be seen." "My sister, she has asked for you. She is distressingly fond of the girl with the sad eyes. If you wish to leave, I will give you enough money to leave Ethelgard and never look back. But I ask that you see her first." "She is agitated." The car slowed, passing through massive iron gates that swung open silently. The spire loomed above them, a Gothic masterpiece of black stone and glass, stretching impossibly high into the night sky. "Why me?" Elena asked quietly. "Surely you have doctors." "Servants." "We have many servants," Valerius said, his voice growing heavy. "We have healers and guards. But we do not have kindness. Not the kind that gives its own skin to save a stranger." He looked at her, his expression intense. "Kindness is a rare currency in my world, Elena. It is usually a trap." The car stopped. The door was opened by a footman. Valerius stepped out and offered her his hand. He waited. He did not command, he offered. Elena looked at his hand. Pale, strong, deadly. She looked at the spire, a fortress of monsters. Then she thought of the girl with the violet eyes, shivering in the alley. Slowly, she reached out and placed her rough, chapped hand into his. His skin was cool, like polished marble, but his grip was gentle. "Come," he said. The interior of the spire was a cathedral of shadows. High-vaulted ceilings disappeared into darkness, illuminated by floating orbs of amber light. The floors were polished obsidian, reflecting their footsteps like a dark mirror. Valerius led her up a sweeping staircase, past tapestries depicting battles that had likely happened before America was founded. They walked down a long corridor until they reached a set of double doors carved from whitewood, a stark contrast to the rest of the castle. "She is inside," Valerius said. He hesitated, his hand on the handle. "Serafina is different. She feels the world too loudly. Do not make sudden movements." He opened the door. The room was a wonderland. Unlike the austere black of the rest of the castle, this room was filled with soft colors, creams, pinks, and golds. There were piles of pillows, shelves overflowing with books, and a glass wall that looked out over the glittering city below. In the center of the room, sitting on a plush rug, was the girl. She was wearing a gown of blue velvet now, her hair brushed and gleaming. But she was rocking back and forth, humming a discordant tune. She stopped when they entered. Her violet eyes locked onto Elena. "You came," Serafina whispered. A smile broke across her face, radiant and heartbreakingly innocent. She scrambled up and ran to Elena. Elena braced herself, but Serafina stopped inches away. She reached out and touched the sleeve of Elena's thin shirt. "You're cold," Serafina said, frowning. "I'm okay," Elena said softly. Serafina turned to her brother. "Val. She's cold. Fix it." Valerius looked at Elena. "I have ordered a suite prepared for you. With a fireplace. And clothes that are not insufficient." "I can't stay here," Elena said, looking between the siblings. "I have a life. I have rent." "Your rent is paid for the next century," Valerius said dismissively. "Your landlord has been informed you have moved on to better employment." "Employment? Serafina needs a companion," Valerius said. He crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Someone who is not a sycophant. Someone who does not look at her with pity or fear." "You looked at her and saw a person." "I'm a waitress," Elena argued. "I don't know how to be a lady-in-waiting or whatever this is." "I don't need a lady," Serafina said. She grabbed Elena's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "I need you. You gave me the warm." Elena looked down at the girl. She saw the desperation in those violet eyes. She knew what it was like to be alone in a crowded room. To be seen as a thing, not a person. She looked at Valerius. The king was watching her with a terrifying intensity. He was waiting for her to reject them. He expected it. He expected her to run from the monsters. "I'll stay," Elena said. "For a little while. Until she's settled." Valerius let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a long time. "Very well." He stepped forward and unclasped the heavy cloak he was wearing, a garment of black wool lined with crimson silk. He swung it around Elena's shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of him. "Until she is settled," he agreed. But as he looked at her, wrapped in his cloak, standing beside his sister, Elena saw the lie in his eyes. He had no intention of letting her go. She had brought warmth into his house of ice, and Valerius, for all his power, was starving for it. The first morning in the onyx spire broke not with sunlight, but with a shift in the shadows. The heavy velvet curtains of Elena's suite were drawn tight, blocking out the day, but the internal clock of a girl who had worked 3 shifts a day for 5 years woke her at 6 a.m. sharp. She sat up, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs before she even remembered where she was. The sheets beneath her were silk, cool and fluid like water. The mattress was so soft it felt like a trap, eager to swallow her whole. Elena scrambled out of the bed, her bare feet sinking into a carpet that was thicker than the blankets she owned back at her apartment. The room was freezing, a deliberate chill that the night-born seemed to favor, but a fire crackled in the hearth, the flames a strange, chemical blue. She walked to the wardrobe, a monstrosity of carved ebony that looked like a coffin standing on end. Inside, her diner uniform was gone. In its place were rows of dresses. They were modest, but constructed of fabrics she couldn't name, heavy wools, soft cottons, thick knits in shades of charcoal, navy, and deep forest green. There was a note on the shelf, written in a sharp, angular script on heavy parchment. "The temperature in the spire is regulated for our comfort, not yours. Dress warmly. V." Elena ran her fingers over a sweater made of gray cashmere. It was softer than anything she had ever touched. A lump formed in her throat, not of gratitude, but of fear. Gifts in her world always came with hooks. What was the price of cashmere? What was the cost of a fire that never burned down? She dressed quickly, choosing the simplest clothes she could find, black trousers and the gray sweater. She felt like an imposter, a waitress in a queen's casting. There was a knock at the door. It wasn't the polite rap of a servant, but a rhythmic pounding. "Elena! Elena! Are you awake?" It was Serafina. Elena opened the door. Serafina stood there, bouncing on the balls of her feet. She was wearing a flowing nightgown that looked like spun sugar, and her feet were bare on the cold stone. "You're up." Serafina clapped her hands. Her violet eyes were bright, too bright, manic with energy. "Val says we have to eat. He says humans die if they don't eat every 4 hours. Is that true? Will you die?" "I won't die if I skip breakfast, Serafina," Elena said gently. "But coffee would be nice." "Coffee." Serafina grabbed Elena's hand. Her skin was ice cold. "We have the best coffee. It comes from Colombia. Or maybe Java. I don't know where Java is. Is it a planet?" She dragged Elena down the corridor. The spire was immense, a labyrinth of black stone and vaulted arches. They passed servants, silent, pale creatures who kept their eyes lowered. But Elena noticed the way they glanced at her as she passed. Hunger. Curiosity. Disdain. They arrived at a dining room that could have seated 50 people. At the far end of a table long enough to land a plane on, Valerius sat reading a newspaper. He looked up as they entered. He was wearing a dark gray shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were pale and corded with muscle. He looked less like a king and more like a weary soldier in the morning light, though the sunglasses were gone, revealing those arresting crimson eyes. "Good morning," he said. His voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the table. "Morning," Elena murmured, taking the seat Serafina pulled out for her. The table was set with a spread that was ludicrously large for one human. eggs, bacon, pastries, fruit that looked like jewels, and a silver pot of coffee. Eat, Valerius commanded. He wasn't eating. A crystal goblet filled with a dark, viscous red liquid sat near his right hand. He took a sip, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. Stop staring at her, Val, Serafina chirped, piling pastries onto her plate. You're doing the predator thing. Valerius blinked, looking genuinely affronted. I am not. You are, Serafina insisted. Your pupils are blown. You look like a cat watching a canary. Elena choked on her coffee. She coughed, wiping her mouth with a linen napkin. Valerius looked away, picking up his newspaper with a snap, but Elena noticed a faint flush of color high on his cheekbones. I have business with the council today, Valerius said, his tone clipped. Serafina, you are to stay in the West Wing. The library or the conservatory. He turned his gaze to Elena. You will stay with her. Do not wander. There are guests in the castle who are not as restrained as I am. Guests? Elena asked. Lords from the outer territories, Valerius said. They're here for the solstice court. They view humans as food or entertainment. You are neither. You are under my protection. But I cannot protect you if you walk into a lion's den. I can look after myself, Elena said, her chin lifting slightly. Valerius lowered the paper slowly. He looked at her, and the air in the room grew heavy and still. Elena, he said softly. You are brave. I saw that in the alley. But you're a candle in a hurricane here. Do not mistake my hospitality for safety. The Spire is a dangerous place. Then why bring me here? She challenged. Because out there, he gestured vaguely to the window, you are prey. In here, you are vital. He glanced at Serafina, who was happily destroying a croissant. To her. The conversation was interrupted by the heavy thud of the double doors opening. A man strode in. He was beautiful in the way a storm front is beautiful, dark, violent, and imposing. He had hair the color of spun gold and eyes that were a flat, dead black. He was followed by 2 guards. Valerius, the man said. His voice was smooth, like oil slicking over gravel. You missed the morning briefing. I was occupied, Caius, Valerius said, not rising. The man, Caius, looked at the table. His eyes landed on Serafina, dismissing her with a sneer, and then settled on Elena. He paused. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. What is this? Caius asked, walking closer. Fresh meat at the breakfast table? You've become decadent, old friend. She is not meat, Valerius said. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in a second. Frost began to creep across the silver coffee pot. Caius ignored the warning. He stopped behind Elena's chair. She froze, her hand gripping her fork so hard her knuckles turned white. She could smell him. He didn't smell like rain and cedar. He smelled like musk and copper. She smells delicious, Caius whispered, leaning down. His breath ghosted over the back of her neck. Fear adds such a lovely spice. Elena didn't think. The reflex that had served her when drunk patrons got too handsy at the diner kicked in. She spun in her chair, bringing the heavy silver fork down. She didn't aim for his face. She aimed for the hand resting on the back of her chair. The tines of the fork slammed into the wood of the chair, missing his fingers by a millimeter as he snatched his hand back with supernatural speed. Back off, Elena snapped. Her voice shook, but her eyes were furious. Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Caius stared at the fork embedded in the ebony wood. Then he looked at Elena, his black eyes widening. He wasn't angry. He was stunned. Caius looked at Valerius. Did your pet just try to stab me with a dessert fork? Valerius was smiling. It was a small, terrifying thing, sharp as a blade. I believe she did, Lord Caius, Valerius drawled. I told you she wasn't meat. Caius looked back at Elena, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. Fascinating. Leave us, Valerius commanded. The amusement vanished, replaced by the crushing weight of his authority. Now, Caius bowed mockingly. As you wish, my king. But the council is waiting. And they will want to know why a human is dining with the royal family. He turned and swept out of the room, his laughter echoing down the corridor. Elena pulled the fork out of the chair. Her hand was trembling violently now that the adrenaline was fading. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have." "You missed," Serafina noted sadly. "Next time, aim for the eye. The wood is too hard." Valerius stood up. He walked around the table and stopped next to Elena. He reached out and gently took the bent fork from her hand. "Do not apologize," he said quietly. "Caius has not been defied in 300 years. It was refreshing." He looked down at her, and for a moment, the distance between them, the centuries, the biology, the power seemed to thin. "But he is right about one thing," Valerius said, his expression darkening. "The council knows you are here now. We cannot hide you." "What does that mean?" Elena asked. "It means," Valerius said, "that today you meet the court. Go change. Wear something black. It hides the shaking." The great hall of the onyx spire was designed to make humans feel small. The ceiling was lost in shadow, and the walls were lined with statues of forgotten gods. In the center of the room sat the council, 12 vampire lords and ladies arranged in a semicircle of high-backed chairs. Elena walked beside Valerius, her boots clicking loudly on the stone floor. Serafina held her left hand, squeezing it rhythmically. Valerius walked on her right, his presence a solid wall of heat against her side. She wore a long black dress Valerius had selected. It was high-necked and long-sleeved, modest but impeccably tailored. She felt like a widow walking to a funeral. Perhaps her own. The council members watched them approach. Their eyes were a kaleidoscope of unnatural colors: gold, red, black, white. Valerius set a woman in the center. She was ancient, her skin like cracked parchment, her eyes milky white. This was Elder Vane. "You bring a mortal into the sacred hall. Is this dinner?" A ripple of laughter went through the room. "This is Elena Vance," Valerius announced. His voice filled the cavernous space without effort. "She is a guest of the crown." "A guest?" Lord Caius sat at the end of the row, toying with a ring on his finger. "Since when do we host cattle?" "Since the cattle showed more nobility than the lords of this court," Valerius shot back. "She touched the princess," another lord hissed. "A human, touching the royal blood. It is a contagion." "She saved the princess," Valerius roared. The sound was like thunder. The torches on the walls flared violently. "While you were bickering over border disputes, my sister was freezing in an alley. This human gave the clothes off her back to save her. She did what none of you would deign to do." The council fell silent, but the air was thick with hostility. "It is against the ancient pacts," Elder Vane said, her voice dry as dust. "Humans are not permitted to reside in the spire unless they are bonded servants." "Is she a servant?" "No," Valerius said. "Then she must leave. Or she must be claimed." Elena looked up at Valerius. "Claimed," she whispered. Valerius's jaw tightened. He looked at the council, then down at Elena. He looked at the pulse fluttering in her neck, at her wide, terrified eyes. He looked at the way Serafina clung to her. "She is not a servant," Valerius said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "She is my ward." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Even Caius looked shocked. "A ward?" Elder Vane leaned forward. "You would place a human under the aegis sanguinis? You would bind your life force to hers?" "I would," Valerius said. "You realize the cost," Caius said, his eyes narrowing. "If she dies, you suffer. If she is harmed, you bleed. You are linking a dragon to a moth, Valerius. It is suicide." "That is my choice," Valerius said. He turned to Elena. "Give me your hand." Elena hesitated. "What are you doing?" "Saving you," he murmured. "Trust me." She held out her hand. Valerius took it. He turned it over, exposing her wrist. Then, he brought it to his mouth. Elena flinched, expecting teeth. Instead, he kissed the inside of her wrist. It wasn't a romantic kiss. It was a searing brand. Heat exploded through her arm, racing up her veins to her heart. She gasped, her knees buckling. Valerius caught her, his arms sweeping around her waist to hold her upright. He looked up at the council, his eyes glowing with a terrifying crimson light. "Witness," he commanded. "Her blood is my blood. Her breath is my breath. Whoever seeks to harm her, seeks to end me. And I will answer accordingly." He released her wrist. A small mark had appeared on her skin, a stylized black flame. "It is done," Elder Vane said, looking at Valerius with a mixture of awe and pity. "The bond is sealed. She may stay. But mark me, King," Caius called out as Valerius turned to leave. "A king who bleeds for a mortal will not remain king for long." Valerius didn't look back. He guided Elena and Seraphina out of the hall, his grip on Elena's waist unyielding. Once they were in the corridor, the heavy door shutting behind them, Valerius released her. He leaned against the stone wall, closing his eyes. For a second, he looked exhausted. "What did you do?" Elena asked, rubbing her wrist. The mark was warm to the touch. "I bought you time," Valerius said, opening his eyes. "And I painted a target on both our backs." The weeks that followed were a blur of surreal lessons and quiet terrors. Elena was no longer just a guest, she was an anomaly. The mark on her wrist acted like a shield, servants bowed when she passed, and guards stepped aside, but it also isolated her. She was the king's weakness. Everyone knew it. Her days were spent with Seraphina. She learned that the princess was not insane, as the rumors suggested, but an empath of terrifying power. She felt the emotions of everyone in the castle. The chaos of the city below was a constant roar in her head. "It's like being in a room where everyone is screaming," Seraphina explained one afternoon as they sat in the conservatory. "But you're quiet, Elena. Your mind is like a soft blanket. That's why I like you." Elena was learning the geography of the spire. The west wing was safe. The east wing, where the visiting lord stayed, was forbidden. The dungeons were a myth she hoped never to verify. But her favorite place was the library. It was a cavernous room spanning 3 floors, filled with books that smelled of vanilla and dust. It was the only place where she felt like herself, where the oppressive weight of the vampire court couldn't reach her. It was there, late one night, that Valerius found her. It was 3 a.m. Elena was curled up in a leather armchair, reading a history of Ethelgard that claimed vampires were benevolent shepherds of humanity. She had snorted aloud at that. "You disagree with the text?" Elena jumped, dropping the book. Valerius stepped out of the shadows. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of suits and ties. He wore a loose white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and black trousers. His feet were bare. "It's propaganda," Elena said, retrieving the book. "It says you protect us from ourselves. Do we not?" Valerius asked, moving to the shelf and running a finger along the spines. "Humans have a remarkable talent for self-destruction. Wars, pollution, greed. We provide order. You provide fear," Elena countered. "Peace at the end of a gun isn't peace. It's just compliance." Valerius turned to look at her. The moonlight filtering through the high windows painted him in silver. "You have a sharp tongue, Elena. It is a wonder you survived the lower district." "I survived by knowing when to shut up," she said. I can't seem to do that around you." "No," he murmured, stepping closer. "You cannot. It is vexing. And intriguing." He sat on the edge of the heavy oak table near her chair. "Why are you awake?" "Nightmares," she admitted. "I keep dreaming about the diner. About Gantry yelling at me. It seems so stupid now, worrying about $40. "It was not stupid," Valerius said seriously. "It was survival. The stakes have merely changed." "Have they?" Elena asked. "I'm still just trying not to get eaten. Now the predators are just better dressed." Valerius laughed. It was a genuine sound, low and rich. "Touché." He looked at her hands resting on the book. "Your hands, they are healing." Elena looked down. The red chapping from the harsh detergents was fading. The cuts were gone. The lotions the servants bring. They work fast. "And the cold?" he asked. "Do you still feel it?" "Always," she said. "This castle is a freezer." "It preserves the books," he said. "And us." He reached out. His hand hovered over hers. "May I?" Elena nodded, her breath catching. He placed his hand over hers. His skin was still cool, but it wasn't the biting cold of the winter wind. It was the solid, grounding cool of earth. "You asked me once why I claimed you," Valerius said softly. "Why I took the risk." "Because of Seraphina," she said. "That was the reason I brought you here," he corrected. The reason I claimed you is because you are the first thing in 400 years that has surprised me. He traced the line of her knuckles with his thumb. The sensation sent shivers racing up her arm. Immortality is boring, Elena, he whispered. It is a long, gray hallway of repetition. We see the same patterns, the same mistakes, the same betrayals. Over and over. We stop feeling because we have felt it all before. He looked into her eyes. The crimson in his irises was swirling, hypnotic. But you gave your coat to a monster, he said. You stood up to Caius with a dessert fork. You argue philosophy with a king in the middle of the night. He leaned in closer. You make me remember what it was like to not know what happens next. The air between them crackled. Elena felt a pull, magnetic and undeniable. She wanted to lean forward. She wanted to bridge the gap. But then, the heavy doors of the library creaked open. My lord. It was Marcus, the head of the guard. He stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. Valerius pulled back, the moment shattering like glass. He stood up, his face instantly composing itself into the mask of the king. What is it, Marcus? There has been an incident, Marcus said, his eyes flicking to Elena. In the kitchens. A servant was found. Drained. Elena gasped. Valerius went rigid. Drained? Inside the spire. Yes, my lord. And... Marcus hesitated. The servant was one of the humans assigned to Miss Vance's detail. Valerius looked at Elena. The warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by a terrifying coldness. Lock the west wing, Valerius commanded. Double the guard on Serafina. He turned to Elena. Go to your room. Lock the door. Open it for no one but me. Valerius. Go, he roared. Elena grabbed her book and ran. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen the fear in the king's eyes. Not fear of the killer, but fear of what the killer was targeting. Someone was hunting, and they weren't hunting for food. They were hunting for the king's weakness. They were hunting her. The lock on Elena's door clicked with a sound like a breaking bone. She stood in the center of the room, the heavy silk of her dress feeling like a shroud. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. She paced. 3 steps to the window, 3 steps back. The window was sealed, the glass thick enough to stop a bullet. Outside, the city of Ethelgard was a sea of glittering lights, oblivious to the monsters warring in the sky above them. It had been 12 hours since Valerius had ordered her confined. 12 hours of silence. No servants came. No food was brought. The isolation was a physical weight, pressing against her eardrums. Then, the handle turned. Elena grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. She held it like a baseball bat, her knuckles white. The door opened. Valerius stepped inside. He looked wrecked. His white shirt was stained with soot and something darker. His hair was disheveled, strands falling into his eyes. He looked at the poker in her hands, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Good, he said, his voice raspy. You have the instinct. Who was it? Elena asked, not lowering the weapon. The servant. Who killed him? An assassin from the southern clans, Valerius said, closing the door and locking it behind him. Hired by someone within the spire. We interrogated him, but he died before he could give up a name. His blood boiled in his veins, a suicide hex. He walked to the small table by the window and poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter. His hand shook slightly. They are testing the fences, Elena. They want to see how far I will go to keep you. Maybe you shouldn't, she said quietly. Maybe you should let me go. I can disappear. I'm good at being invisible. Valerius turned, the glass halfway to his lips. You are marked. If you leave these walls, you will be dead within the hour. And, because of the bond. He tapped his chest. I would likely follow you. He downed the drink in one swallow and set the glass down with a sharp clink. I cannot lock you in this room forever. The solstice court is tomorrow night. Tradition dictates that the king and his household must attend. You want me to go to a party? Elena asked incredulously. With people who want to kill me? I want you to be seen, Valerius said. I want them to see that I am not afraid. And I want them to see that you are not prey. He crossed the room, stopping just out of reach of the poker. Put that down, Elena. Iron is useless against the Elder Lords. If you are to survive tomorrow, you need to learn how to use something that bites. The training room was deep in the bowels of the spire, a chamber of gray stone that smelled of sweat and steel. It was cold here, a damp chill that seeped through the soles of Elena's shoes. Valerius had stripped off his ruined shirt, wearing only a fitted black tank top that exposed the terrifying geography of his scars. There were slash marks, burn scars, and puncture wounds that told the history of a violent life. He handed Elena a dagger. It was beautiful and terrifying silver, balanced perfectly, with a hilt wrapped in black leather. Silver burns us, Valerius explained. It stops the healing. If you cut a vampire with steel, he will laugh. If you cut him with this, he will bleed. I don't want to kill anyone, Elena said, the weapon feeling heavy and foreign in her hand. That is a luxury you no longer have, Valerius said sharply. Attack me. What? Attack me. Try to cut me. Elena hesitated. I can't. Do it, he roared. Startled, Elena lunged. It was a clumsy, desperate strike. Valerius didn't even move his feet. He simply shifted his weight, caught her wrist, and twisted. Elena gasped as the dagger clattered to the floor. In a blink, she was pinned against the stone wall, Valerius's forearm against her throat. Not choking her, but holding her there. Dead, he whispered. His face was inches from hers. You hesitated. You telegraphed the blow. You looked at my chest before you struck. He stepped back, releasing her. Again. For 3 hours, he drove her. He was relentless. He didn't use his speed or his strength, only technique, forcing her to see the openings she missed. Again. 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 Elena was panting, sweat soaking her back. Her muscles screamed. She was bruised where she had hit the floor. I can't, she wheezed, leaning hands on knees. You can, Valerius said. He was barely breathing hard. Because if you don't, Serafina will be left alone. Do you think Caius will be kind to her if I am gone? Do you think the council will tolerate her madness? The mention of Serafina sparked something in Elena's chest. A hot, bright anger. She looked at the dagger on the floor. She snatched it up. This time, she didn't lunge. She waited. She watched his eyes. She saw him shift his weight to the left. She feinted right, then dropped to her knees and slashed upward. It was a move born of desperation, not skill, but it was fast. The flat of the blade slapped against Valerius's ribs. If it had been the edge, it would have opened him up. Valerius froze. He looked down at her, kneeling on the mats, the dagger pressed against his side. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. It wasn't the polite mask of the king. It was a predator's grin, proud and fierce. Good, he breathed. He reached down and pulled her to her feet. But he didn't let go of her hand. His thumb traced the pulse in her wrist, right over the mark he had placed there. You are small, he murmured. They will underestimate that. They will look at your fear and miss your rage. I'm not rageful, Elena said, her breath hitching. You are, he corrected softly. It is quiet, like a coal under ash. But it is there. He stepped closer. The air between them grew thin. Elena could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell the scent of exertion and cedar. His eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. Tomorrow night, he whispered, stay close to me. But if we are separated, do not hesitate. Strike first. Strike hard. I will, she promised. He leaned his forehead against hers. For a moment, just a heartbeat, he closed his eyes. It was a gesture of such profound intimacy that Elena felt like an intruder. I never wanted this for you, he confessed, his voice rough. I wanted to give you a warm coat and a safe life. Instead, I gave you a knife. I'd rather have the knife, Elena whispered, than be helpless. Valerius pulled back, his eyes searching hers. Then keep it close. The solstice ball was a riot of excess. The grand hall had been transformed into a winter garden. Trees made of ice sculpture lined the walls, and the chandeliers had been dimmed to mimic starlight. 300 guests filled the room. The elite of the Nightborn. They wore velvets and silks in colors of blood and shadow. The air smelled of expensive perfume, old dust, and the metallic tang of hunger. Elena walked into the room on Valerius's arm. She wore a dress of deep crimson, the color of the king's eyes. It was backless, long-sleeved, and fitted like a second skin. Beneath the slit in the skirt, strapped to her thigh, was the silver dagger. The room went silent as they entered. Hundreds of predator eyes locked onto them. "Breathe," Valerius murmured, his hand warm on the small of her back. "Head high. You're the king's ward. You're untouchable." They descended the staircase. Serafina was waiting at the bottom, looking terrified in a pale blue gown. She rushed to them, grabbing Elena's free hand. "It's too loud," Serafina whispered, though the music was soft. "Their thoughts are too loud. They're all hungry, Elena." "Focus on me," Elena said, squeezing her hand. "Just look at me, Serafina. Ignore them." The night was a blur of introductions. Lords and ladies bowed to Valerius, offering stiff, formal greetings, while their eyes raked over Elena with open disdain or curiosity. Lord Valerius, a voice dripped with false honey. It was Caius. He was wearing a suit of white silk, standing out like a flare in the dark room. And the little waitress, Caius smirked, looking Elena up and down. "You clean up well, my dear. Though I suppose you're used to serving." Elena felt Valerius tense beside her, violence coiling in his muscles. But she placed a hand on his arm, restraining him. She looked Caius in the eye. "I am used to dealing with difficult customers, Lord Caius. Usually, we just kick the drunk ones out." A few nearby guests gasped. A low chuckle rippled through the group. Caius's smile vanished. His eyes went flat and black. "Careful, girl. Tongues can be removed. And heads can be separated from shoulders," Valerius said pleasantly. "Shall we test which is faster?" Caius glared at him, then bowed stiffly. "Enjoy the evening, my king. It may be your last." He disappeared into the crowd. "He is plotting something," Valerius murmured. "I can feel it." "Valerius!" A frantic voice called out. It was Marcus, the head of the guard. He looked pale. "My lord." "The perimeter alarms. The northern breach. Something has broken through." "Impossible," Valerius snapped. "The wards hold against everything." "Not everything," Marcus said grimly. "Werewolves." The word hit the room like a bomb. The music stopped. "Wolves." Valerius's face went hard. "In the city?" "A pack. They've breached the garden walls." Valerius turned to Elena. "Go to the library. Take Serafina. Bar the doors." "What about you?" she asked, gripping his arm. "I have to hold the line," he said. "Go." He shoved her toward the side exit, then turned and blurred into motion, heading for the main doors, his guards trailing behind him. "Come on," Elena said, grabbing Serafina's hand. "Run." They sprinted through the crowd. Panic had set in. The vampires were hissing, their human masks slipping to reveal fangs and distorted features. They reached the corridor leading to the library. It was empty, the sounds of the ballroom fading behind them. "Elena," Serafina stopped, digging her heels in. "Wait." "We can't wait, Serafina." "No," Serafina whispered. Her eyes were wide, staring at the empty air. "Not wolves." "That's a lie." "The thoughts, they aren't wolves." "What?" "It's a distraction," Serafina said. She looked down the hall, toward the library doors. "They're waiting for us inside." Elena froze. The library. The safe place. The place Valerius had told her to go. If there was a traitor, they would know the protocols. They would know exactly where Valerius would send his sister and his weakness. "Back," Elena whispered. "We have to go back." She turned, pulling Serafina. But the corridor behind them was no longer empty. Standing there, blocking their path back to the ballroom, was Marcus, the loyal head of the guard. The man who had just sent Valerius away to fight a phantom enemy. "Marcus?" Elena asked, though her gut was already twisting into ice. Marcus didn't smile. He drew his sword, a blade of dull gray steel. "I'm sorry, Miss Vance," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Valerius has lost his way. He puts a human before the court. He puts a mad girl before the kingdom." Caius promised order. He promised a return to the old ways. "You're the traitor," Elena breathed. I am a patriot, Marcus corrected. He advanced slowly. Give me the princess. I will make her end quick. You. Caius wants you alive. For a while. Elena shoved Seraphina behind her. Run, Seraphina. Find Valerius. I won't leave you. Seraphina cried. Run. Elena screamed. Seraphina hesitated, then bolted down a side passage, her footsteps echoing. Marcus ignored her. He was focused entirely on Elena. She won't get far. The exits are sealed. Now, make this easy. Elena hiked up her skirt and drew the dagger. The silver gleamed in the torchlight. Marcus laughed. A kitchen knife? Against a master of the guard. Come and get it, Elena said, her voice trembling but her stance wide. Marcus moved. He was fast, faster than anything Elena had ever seen. He was a blur of motion. But Elena didn't try to match his speed. She remembered the training. Wait. Watch. She saw the sword arcing down toward her shoulder. She threw herself to the floor, sliding on the polished stone. The sword sparked against the wall where her head had been a second before. She rolled and slashed at his legs. The silver blade caught his calf. It sliced through the trousers and into the flesh. Marcus roared. It wasn't just pain. The silver seared him. He stumbled, falling to one knee. Elena scrambled up. She didn't wait. She lunged, aiming for his neck. But Marcus was a veteran of 100 wars. Even on his knees, he was deadly. He backhanded her. The blow caught her across the chest. It felt like being hit by a car. Elena flew backward, slamming into the stone wall. The air left her lungs. Her vision went white. The dagger skittered across the floor, out of reach. She slid down the wall, gasping, tasting blood. Her ribs felt like broken glass. Marcus stood up, limping. His eyes were burning red with fury. Enough games, he growled. He raised the sword. Elena couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She watched the blade rise, the metal glinting in the light. I'm sorry, Valerius, she thought. I tried. The sword came down. Then, the world exploded. The wall beside Elena shattered inward. Stone and dust sprayed everywhere. A figure burst through the masonry like a cannonball. It slammed into Marcus before the sword could connect. There was a sickening crunch of bone. Marcus was thrown across the corridor like a rag doll, smashing into the opposite wall with enough force to crack the stone. The dust settled. Standing over Elena, chest heaving, covered in drywall dust and blood that wasn't his, was Valerius. He looked monstrous. His fangs were fully extended, his claws out. His eyes were two pits of hellfire. You, Valerius snarled, pointing a clawed hand at the broken heap of Marcus. You touched her. Marcus groaned, trying to rise. His healing factor was already fighting the damage, but he was broken. She is a weakness, Marcus spat, blood bubbling from his lips. Valerius walked toward him. He didn't rush. He stalked. She is not my weakness, Valerius said, his voice a low, vibrating hum that shook the floorboards. She is my heart. And you just tried to cut it out. Valerius grabbed Marcus by the throat and lifted him one-handed into the air. Valerius, wait. Elena gasped from the floor. Valerius froze. He looked back at her. Seeing her slumped against the wall, blood on her lips, the rage in his face faltered. He knows who else is involved, Elena wheezed. Don't kill him yet. Valerius looked back at Marcus. The struggle for control was visible in every muscle of his back. Finally, he slammed Marcus into the wall again, dropping him. You will live, Valerius hissed. Only long enough to beg for death. He turned and fell to his knees beside Elena. The monster vanished, replaced by the terrified man. Elena, he whispered, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch. Where are you hurt? Ribs, she groaned. And my dignity. He let out a jagged laugh that sounded like a sob. He bit his own wrist, tearing the skin. Drink, he commanded, pressing his bleeding wrist to her lips. It will heal the bones. Elena hesitated only a second. The metallic scent of his blood was overwhelming. She drank. It didn't taste like blood. It tasted like fire and chocolate and life. The pain in her chest receded instantly, replaced by a warm, buzzing energy. "Serafina," Elena said, pulling away. She ran down the service passage. "She is safe," Valerius said, wiping a smudge of dust from her cheek. "My shadows are with her." He scooped Elena up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "Where are we going?" she asked, resting her head against his shoulder. "To the council chamber," Valerius said. His face was hard again, the king returning. "Caius wanted a show. I am going to give him one." The doors to the grand hall were thrown open. The music had stopped. The guests were murmuring, confused by the false alarm about the wolves. Valerius strode in, carrying Elena. He looked like a god of war, covered in dust, blood on his shirt, his eyes blazing. He walked to the center of the room. He didn't put Elena down. He held her like a holy relic. "There were no wolves," Valerius announced. His voice boomed, silencing the hall. "There were only rats." He gestured to the door. Two of his loyal guards dragged the broken body of Marcus into the room and threw him at the feet of the council. Gasps filled the room. "Marcus," Valerius said, "has confessed to an assassination attempt on my ward. And he is named as co-conspirator." Valerius turned his gaze slowly, deliberately, until it landed on Caius. Caius stood near the punch bowl, looking pale. "Lies," Caius shouted. "The man is delirious with pain." "He has not spoken yet," Valerius said softly. "But he will." Valerius looked down at Elena in his arms. "Are you able to stand?" "Yes," she said. He set her down. She stood on her own, the vampire blood coursing through her, making her feel stronger than she had ever been. She smoothed her red dress. "This woman," Valerius said, addressing the room, "bled for my kin. Tonight, she bled for me. The ancient laws are clear. An attack on a ward is an act of war." He drew a sword from the scabbard of a nearby guard. He pointed it at Caius. "Caius of the southern clans," Valerius declared. "I challenge you. Blood and ash. Here and now." The crowd screamed. A challenge of blood and ash was a duel to the death. It hadn't been invoked in centuries. Caius sneered, regaining his composure. He unbuttoned his white jacket and tossed it aside. "You are tired, Valerius. You are emotional. You are weak." Caius drew his own blade, a rapier of black steel. "I will free the throne from your sentimentality." The circle formed. The king and the usurper. Elena stood at the edge of the circle. Her heart was racing, but her mind was clear. She watched Caius. She watched his feet. She watched his eyes. And she saw something. Caius wasn't looking at Valerius. He was glancing at the shadows behind the throne. Elena followed his gaze. There, hidden in the drapery, was a crossbowman. The bolt was aimed not at Valerius, but at Elena. If Valerius fought, he would be distracted trying to protect her. Caius knew he wouldn't focus on the duel if Elena was in danger. Elena looked around. She saw a silver tray on a nearby table. Valerius and Caius lunged at each other. Steel clashed with a sound like a ringing bell. They moved faster than thought, a whirlwind of violence. Elena didn't watch the fight. She moved. She grabbed the heavy silver tray. The crossbowman adjusted his aim. He was waiting for Valerius to turn his back. Elena ran. She didn't run away. She ran toward the throne. "Elena, no!" Serafina screamed from the balcony. The crossbowman fired. At the same moment, Elena threw the silver tray like a frisbee. It was a 1,000,000,000 to 1 shot. A waitress throwing a tray across a diner to a passing busboy. The heavy silver platter intercepted the bolt in midair. There was a loud clang. The bolt deflected, skidding harmlessly across the stone floor. The sound echoed through the silent hall. Valerius froze. Caius froze. The crossbowman in the shadows gasped. Valerius looked at the bolt. He looked at the tray spinning on the floor. He looked at Elena. Then he looked at Caius. The rage that exploded from Valerius then was not the rage of a king. It was the rage of a force of nature. "You brought a second weapon to a duel of honor," Valerius said. His voice was no longer human. He dropped his sword. "I don't need steel for you," Valerius whispered. He moved. He was a shadow. A blur. He was on Caius before the other vampire could blink. He didn't strike. He grabbed. He ripped. It was over in seconds. Caius fell to the floor, or what was left of him. Valerius stood over the body, breathing heavily. He turned to the crossbowman, who was now trembling in the curtains. "Run," Valerius said. "Tell the southern clans what happens when you touch what is mine." The assassin fled. Valerius turned to the room. He was covered in blood. He looked terrifying. But he walked straight to Elena. He fell to his knees in front of her, the king kneeling to the waitress in front of the entire court. "You saved me," he whispered, pressing his forehead against her stomach. "We saved each other," Elena said, her hand resting in his hair. The court watched in silence. And then, slowly, one by one, they began to kneel. Not to Valerius alone, but to the pair of them. The silence that followed the violence was heavier than the stone walls of the spire. The music had long since died, replaced by the ragged breathing of the survivors and the soft, wet sound of servants cleaning the marble floor. Valerius did not speak to the council. He did not boast. He simply lifted Elena into his arms again, despite her protests that she could walk, and carried her out of the great hall. This time, no one whispered. No one sneered. The eyes that followed them were lowered in a mixture of fear and a strange, new reverence. He carried her not to her guest suite, but higher, up a spiraling staircase of glass and iron that led to the very apex of the spire, his private sanctuary. The doors sealed behind them with a definitive thud, shutting out the world, the politics, and the smell of blood. The room was vast, dominated by a wall of glass that offered a panoramic view of Ethelgard burning with electric light below. But Valerius had no eyes for his kingdom. He set her down on a velvet chaise lounge near the fire, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled away. He looked at her as if checking for cracks in a porcelain vase. "You are bleeding," he said, his voice a broken husk. "It's just a scratch," Elena said, touching the cut on her cheek where debris from the wall had grazed her. "And the ribs. They feel better already. Your blood. It heals the body," Valerius murmured, turning away to pace the length of the hearth. "It does not heal the memory. I promised to protect you, Elena. And tonight, you stood in front of a crossbow for me." He stopped and gripped the mantle, his knuckles white. "I failed." Elena rose slowly. The vampire blood in her system was still humming a dull, warm buzz that made the pain in her chest feel distant. She walked to him, her bare feet silent on the rug. "Valerius," she said. He didn't turn. "I should send you away. To the coast. Somewhere the sun shines and the shadows do not bite. I am arrogant to think I can keep you here without destroying you. Look at me." He turned slowly. His crimson eyes were dim, clouded with a profound, ancient exhaustion. "You didn't fail," Elena said firmly. She reached out and took his hand. It was stained with Caius's blood, dark and sticky. She didn't flinch. "You think protection means keeping me in a glass box. That's what you did with Serafina. That's why she was breaking." She stepped closer, forcing him to look down at her. "You can't protect people by hiding them, Valerius. You protect them by giving them the strength to stand beside you. Tonight, I wasn't a victim. I was a participant. And I chose to be there." Valerius stared at her, the self-loathing in his expression slowly fracturing, revealing the awe beneath. He lifted his hand, then hesitated, looking at the blood on his skin. "I am covered in death," he whispered. "Then let's wash it off," Elena said. She led him to the adjoining bathing chamber. It was a room of black tile and steam, centered around a pool sunk into the floor. She turned the brass taps and water cascaded out, hot and smelling of eucalyptus. There was no seduction in the act, only a tender, necessary service. Elena unbuttoned his ruined shirt, peeling the fabric away from his skin. She took a warm cloth and began to wash the blood from his chest, his arms, his hands. Valerius stood still, his eyes closed, surrendering to her touch. For a creature who had spent centuries being the hardest thing in the room, the stone against which waves broke, this moment of softness seemed to undo him. When his hands were clean, he caught hers. He brought them to his lips, kissing the knuckles she had bruised punching Marcus. You threw a serving tray, he murmured, a ghost of a laugh escaping him. At a master assassin. It was silver, Elena defended with a tired smile. I figured it would sting. Valerius opened his eyes. The crimson was bright again, burning with a fierce, possessive warmth. It did more than sting, he said. It changed the world. They saw Elena. The council saw a human fight for a vampire. Not out of thrall, not out of fear, but out of loyalty. You broke their narrative. He cupped her face. You are not just my ward anymore. You are my conscience. That sounds like a heavy job, she whispered. We will share the weight, Valerius promised. He leaned down, and this time, there was no hesitation. He kissed her. It wasn't the kiss of a hungry monster. It was the kiss of a drowning man finding air. It was desperate and tender, tasting of eucalyptus and iron. Elena wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, anchoring him to the earth. In that moment, the king of the Nightborn belonged entirely to the waitress from the Rusty Spoon. The changes did not happen overnight. Rome was not built in a day, and the prejudices of the Onyx Court were not dismantled in a week. But the wind had shifted. 3 months after the solstice, the spire was a different place. The heavy velvet curtains that had shrouded the windows for centuries were pulled back in the common rooms, letting in the gray winter light. Elena sat at a desk in the library, surrounded by stacks of parchment. She was no longer wearing the severe black dresses of the court, but a tailored suit of charcoal wool that allowed her to move, to work, to run if she had to. The petition from the Sanitation Guild, Serafina said, dropping a piece of paper onto the desk. Elena looked up. Serafina looked radiant. The haunted look was gone from her eyes, replaced by a focused intensity. She was still fragile, still felt the world too loudly, but she had learned to build filters. What do they want? Elena asked. Hazard pay, Serafina said, sitting on the edge of the desk. Apparently, cleaning up after the vampire's feed is psychologically taxing. They want a 20% raise and mental health benefits. Give them 30%, Elena said, signing the document. And access to the healing wing. Val isn't going to like the budget increase, Serafina warned, though she was grinning. Valerius can complain to me over dinner, Elena said. If the humans in this city stop working, the vampires starve. It's time the council realized who actually runs the infrastructure. The doors opened and Valerius entered. He looked tired. He had spent the day in negotiations with the southern clans, who were currently leaderless and panicking, but his face lit up when he saw them. You are bankrupting me, he stated, walking over to inspect the paperwork. I'm investing in stability, Elena corrected. She stood up and kissed his cheek. How did the meeting go? They are terrified, Valerius said, leaning against the desk. They expected me to purge Caius's entire line. When I told them I would offer amnesty in exchange for a renewed blood oath, they didn't know how to react. Mercy confuses them. Good, Elena said. Confusion makes them listen. Valerius looked at her, pride radiating from him. You have become a terrifying politician, Elena Vance. I had a good teacher, she said. I used to watch a man run a diner on a shoestring budget while dodging health inspectors. Dealing with ancient warlords is surprisingly similar. Just more velvet. Valerius took her hand, his thumb tracing the mark on her wrist. The black flame had faded slightly, settling into her skin like a tattoo. There is another matter, Valerius said, his tone turning serious. The council has requested a formal bonding ceremony. Elena froze. I thought we were already bonded. We are, Valerius said. Biologically. Magically. But politically, they want a queen, Elena. They want to know that the alliance is permanent. Serafina hopped off the desk. I'll go check on the Sanitation Guild, she said, winking as she slipped out the door. Elena looked at Valerius. A queen? I'm human, Valerius. I'll age. I'll die. In 50 years, I'll be an old woman, and you'll still look like this. And I will love you when you are gray, Valerius said fiercely. I will love you when your skin is paper and your hands shake. And when you are gone, I will mourn you for the rest of eternity. That is the price I am willing to pay. But are you willing to make me one of you? Elena asked. It was the question that had hung between them for months, unspoken. Valerius flinched. He looked away, toward the window. I have seen what immortality does to the soul, he said quietly. It hollows you out. It takes the urgency from life. I would not curse you with it. Then don't, Elena said. She took his face in her hands. Let me be human. Let me be the ticking clock in your court. Let me remind you that time matters because it ends. Valerius closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. A mortal queen, he mused. It has never been done. First time for everything, Elena whispered. Besides, someone has to keep you humble. 6 years later. The winter had come hard to Ethelgard again. The snow was piled high against the storefronts, and the wind howled through the canyons of steel and glass. In the lower district, the neon sign of the Rusty Spoon buzzed with a renewed vigor. The diner had been renovated, new booths, a working heater, and a menu that actually included fresh vegetables. Elena sat in the back booth, watching the snow fall. She was 30 now. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes, marks of laughter and stress. She wore a coat of heavy black wool, cut in the style of the high court, but beneath it, she wore jeans. The bell chimed. A young girl walked in. She was maybe 18, shivering violently, wearing a thin hoodie that offered no protection against the gale. She looked around nervously, clutching a handful of crumpled bills. Elena didn't wait for the waitress on duty. She slid out of the booth. She picked up the jacket that lay on the seat beside her. It wasn't the denim one that was long gone, enshrined in a memory box in the spire. This was a high-quality parka, insulated and waterproof. Elena walked over to the girl. Hey, Elena said. The girl jumped, looking ready to bolt. I just wanted coffee. I have money. Keep your money, Elena said. She held out the coat. You look like you're freezing. The girl stared at the coat, then at Elena. She saw the expensive clothes, the authority in Elena's stance. Why? The girl asked suspiciously. Because it's cold, Elena said, smiling. And because someone once told me that kindness is the only thing that keeps the winter out. The girl hesitated, then took the coat. She pulled it on, sighing as the warmth hit her. Thank you, she whispered. Get some soup, Elena said, nodding to the counter. It's on the house. Elena turned to leave, pulling her own gloves on. As she stepped out into the snowy street, a black sedan was waiting at the curb. The window rolled down. Valerius sat in the back. He hadn't aged a day, of course, but his expression was softer, less guarded than the king who had stormed into this diner years ago. Another stray? He asked as she slid into the warm car. Another investment, Elena corrected, kissing him. Did you bring the file on the housing reform? I did, Valerius said, tapping a folder on his lap. The council is complaining again. They say you care more about the humans than the blood supply. If the humans freeze, there is no blood supply, Elena said, settling back as the car pulled away, gliding smoothly toward the spire that pierced the clouds in the distance. You are ruthless, Valerius murmured admiringly. I learned from the best. As the car wound its way up the hill, Elena looked back at the city. It was still a dangerous place. There were still monsters in the shadows. But the lights seemed a little brighter now. The divide between the predator and the prey had blurred, bridged by a woman who refused to be either. She touched the mark on her wrist, feeling the steady, eternal thrum of Valerius's life force mixed with her own. She remembered the girl in the alley. The waitress with the cheap jacket. The moment she had decided that her warmth was worth sharing, even if it cost her everything. It had cost her her old life. But it had bought her a world. Valerius, she asked softly. Yes, my love. Do we have any more coats in storage? I think it's going to be a long winter. Valerius smiled, and for a moment, his eyes weren't the eyes of a king, but simply a man in love. We have as many as you need, he said. We have the whole kingdom. The car disappeared into the snow, heading home.